So season 3 of Euphoria was bad. Some people are in denial about that. Some people are genuinely misunderstanding why people don't like it. I've heard everything from, oh, you guys don't like it because there's no more glitter, which some people probably don't. Like, they're kind of childish though. But it's not about the fact that there's no more glitter. It's the fact that there's not a cohesive cinematic style that actually supports the narrative. It would be an understatement to say that seasons 1 and 2 of Euphoria were pretty well received. The show's unique visual aesthetic, created by a young Petra Collins, along with the music and the content matter, created a dark teen drama colored by the whimsical naivety and intense emotions of these characters. The show earned 25 Emmy nominations, 9 wins, and it introduced us to lesser-known actors at the time who we grew to love. It wasn't just the critics who loved Euphoria, though. The show was a cultural phenomenon. When I was in college, Euphoria Sundays were huge. And not just online, people gathered in real life to go to watch parties and watch the season finale. And this is a huge deal, especially coming out of or in the midst of COVID. So how do we go from this to disappointment among critics and fans? It's well known that the departure from the style and sound created by Petra Collins and Labyrinth, in addition to actors either leaving the show or the tragic passing and illnesses of Angus Cloud and Eric Dane, and what read as disinterested performances from other actors contributed to this. But ultimately, losing actors and art and music talent is not an excusable cause for this decline. It's not something that couldn't have been salvaged by good writing, and therein lies the problem. What really killed Euphoria was bad writing. And we're going to explore that through the many character lobotomies, a misused medium, and a misunderstanding of the show's audience. When I say character lobotomies, what I mean is these characters are unrecognizable. And they're unrecognizable because there's such a huge disconnection from the versions of themselves that we see in season 3 to the versions of themselves in seasons 1 and 2. What we have now is flat, one-dimensional characters. In seasons 1 and 2, Maddie is complex. On the surface, she is bold and confident, even a little cold at times, but we can see that really she's being abused and she's constantly putting on a performance. Even though she can be manipulative and dead wrong at times, we see that she has some morals by the way that she treats racists and the way that she genuinely deeply cares about her friends, even when it's not easy and even when they stab her in the back. She's not perfect, she's complex. She is hurt. She's hyper independent, but she's caring, she's strong, she shows great maturity. In the end, even though she's a teenager, she chooses herself. She moves past Nate and Cassie, and that's an incredibly hard thing to do, especially at that age. So why does season 3 of Maddie feel like a regression? Instead of mature, she's vindictive, and instead of principled, she's greedy and desperate. Instead of accepting, she's judgmental. This side of Maddie has always existed. As a teen, we saw the way that she got back at people. We saw that she even had a reputation for it. But by the end, it seemed like she chose an authenticity in herself over performance and immaturity. The Maddie of season 3 doesn't exist as a balance between principle and temptation, or forgiveness and revenge, or self-love and self-sacrifice. We strip her of the balance that makes a character complex and realistic, and we've reduced her to this caricature, to a lady pimp. Maddie has always cared about Rue and Lexi. Now she's ignoring the signs of a man that's clearly making Rue uncomfortable, and she's putting Lexi's job on the line all for her own selfish gain. She's trafficking women, not even just as revenge for Cassie, but just for greed. And what's the justification for this? That she has to help her mom pay her bills? That's not enough. Rue has always been a complex character. Even when Rue was on her worst behavior and hurting everyone around her, we understood the nature of addiction that drove her to act this way. And we saw the guilt and the remorse that she felt. We saw that the way she treated others wasn't out of disregard, but a lack of ability to care for anyone, and even herself. But now, Rue feels more like a vehicle for action rather than the other way around. Seasons 1 and 2 communicated the inner world, the complexity of these characters with writing as well as cinematography. We knew these characters, we knew their motivations, their fears, and so when they did something, we felt something. Rue's presence within these action scenes communicate nothing to us about Rue. What do we know about Rue this season? We know that she's sober, we know that she misses her mom and she misses Jules, we know she's being trafficked. That's about it. We get a little insight into her feeling lost and turning to religion, but it feels so separated from the drug plot, even though they attempted to tie them together. Her decision to go on one last job has zero stakes because the extent of her internal conflict is us seeing her read a few Bible verses from time to time and asking Ali if she's a bad person. Her progression, like other characters, is linear. You know, she's someone who struggled with addiction and hurting those around her and guilt, and she falls into a life where she has to struggle with her addiction and actively harm people on a much larger scale. But ultimately, without the guilt and without the remorse, it falls flat. There is no internal conflict, and there is no counter emotion to help us justify the means. Cassie has always been desperate for male validation because of her absent father. So marrying an abuser, being desperate for attention, and needing to feel chosen, it makes sense. But when did Cassie become a bland idiot? When did she become a pet? Again, her progression is linear, but it's flat. In seasons 1 and 2, Cassie relied on external validation, and now she relies on others to survive. She did terrible things, but they were expressions of her low self-esteem. When she was self-serving and making stupid decisions, it was because of her insecurity. And so now we see all of the self-centeredness and all of the stupidness, but there's no internal backing. She really, really wants $50,000 flowers, but why? Just because? Immediately, the first chance that she gets, she switches on Maddie. But why? Is she still envious? I mean, if she dislikes her life or she's unsatisfied with it, why? In season 1 and 2, Nate Jacobs is traumatized and abused by his father, he's enabled by his mother, and he's expressing it through his abuse and his objectification of his peers, and we also see the internal conflict around his sexuality. In season 3, we see Nate, who is incredibly one-note and void of any complex emotions, and he behaves in a way that's just confusing. See, it makes sense that he marries Cassie because abusers seek out insecure and vulnerable partners. This is the entire basis of their relationship, and so how does that dynamic evolve into this? We don't see the abusive or erratic side of Nate, and we can infer that life hit Nate and it brought him to reality by the fact that he's left to take over his father's business, but that's pretty much the only characterization that we get from him. We don't really see how any of this impacted him, except for the fact that he has accepted it. We barely get any moments with Nate alone or any time for him to internalize anything. And the moments with him that we do get with characters reveal nothing about him or their relationship. There is no depth to any of his conversations. Not with Cassie, not with Cal, not even with Jules. And how do we justify his death? I saw someone say that it was sort of a resolution to his greed, but we didn't even get that characterization of him. His ambition had not yet gotten to the point of greed. It was really just desperation and cowardice as a response to a level of responsibility that he wasn't ready for. And how does Nate cope with all this? Well, we don't have any idea. And then he dies. And what do we learn about Nate or the story from his death? Ultimately, all these main characters face the same problem. They follow a linear progression that is flat, and it erases any complexity that they once had. Toxic masculinity is stripped of its complexity. It's no longer a response to abuse, dealing with feelings of fear, inadequacy, or a desire for acceptance. Maddie's exterior, her bad bitch aesthetic, is no longer a defense mechanism to protect herself. The complexity of addiction isn't given the nuance or the highs and lows of the self-preservation along with the guilt that come along with it. The woman who objectifies herself is no longer overcompensating or desiring to feel loved. The plot is no longer a vehicle to expand the character's inner world. Now, the character are just vehicles to deliver action. Week after week, I watched this show with my roommate, and every week we left feeling disgusted, uncomfortable, and confused. I came across this Reddit comment that made me reconsider my perspective. So I thought for a second, maybe I am viewing this show wrong and too harshly. Like, it's fun to get on TikTok and laugh at how bad the show is, but is it really bad? This is the comment that made me reconsider. The critique of season 3, that Sam Levinson is nothing but a pervert who collapsed the character arcs of Maddie, Cassie, and Rue into instruments of sexual commodification and shock value, is missing the point. This got my attention because I love you guys don't understand what's going on. You guys don't get it. Let me tell you what's going on, because sometimes they're very valid. Anyways, missing the point. This season is about the collapse of the American future. To be clear, the first 2 seasons were already dark-ass portrayals of American adolescence. Still, the show framed youth through a kind of intoxicating emotional intensity. there was still love, transforming of identity, rebellion, and even possibility. And that is completely true. I agree with that. I'm on board. Euphoria's unique style and cinematography and the music that made it the show that it is today serve this theme very well. Sam describes the cinematography as emotional realism. The glitter, the pretty colors, the glow, the euphoric feel is meant to communicate what these teens are feeling like inside. He paints this world with the emotions of these teenagers and all of their intense feelings, and he puts us in that world, and it works really, really well. Season 3 strips that away. Perfect. So we go from these completely green, naive, stupid teens, these fresh teens who cannot fathom the concept of consequences. They are in high school. They are the center, the sun of their world. There is no conceptualization of what happens after this and what the consequences to my actions are. This is Euphoria. This is, I am in the moment. I am acting off of my feelings, of my intense, strong feelings that to me right now feel like the only valid thing in the world. He did an amazing job creating that world and bringing viewers into it. And from the beginning, the show was never expected to be some great, profound commentary on anything, really. It was a beautiful story about people and their interactions with each other and themselves and their growth, about teenagers. And the cinematography added a lot to that story, and it sucked us into the world even more. And we switch to a different kind of realism that Sam depicts with Western aesthetics. It was inspired by Westerns, and it is giving, the wild, wild West. And that makes sense too. They're not children anymore. We've come back after a 4 or 5 year time gap. So we don't have the same fresh, pure, euphoric naivety that we have with the teenagers in seasons 1 and 2, especially season 1. We now have these young adults who they are faced with building their own future. So they now have responsibility. The lack of responsibility in that first season is what allowed for there to be this sense of euphoria, right? You don't have euphoria if you're thinking about what's happening tomorrow. We are past that point. We're adults. So now we are tasked with the responsibility of building and creating our lives. And even though they have grown and developed a little, this is still a beginning. These are still very young adults. I think they're 22, 21. So instead of that childlike or adolescent naivety, they now have this young adult naivety where they are romanticizing things that they have not yet truly experienced and do not understand. They don't understand how certain forces influence them to romanticize things like sex work and drugs and fame and marriage. So the Wild West aesthetic, to me, does make a lot of sense. But where this season falls flat, in my opinion, is the execution. Because we're going to finish reading this comment, so let's finish reading the comment. In this season, the future itself disappears. Not only for Cassie, Maddie, Rue, and the rest, but for American youth more broadly. These characters are no longer simply troubled teenagers. They're economically trapped, spiritually suffocated, and increasingly transactional with one another. Love becomes economic dependency. Sex and crime become the only labor available. I think this may be another one of the reasons that this season just was not resonating with viewers. Because this is not an invalid perspective to have or to want to depict, but you didn't really take us on the journey with you of how these characters got to be in the positions that they're in. I understand that Cassie was always desperate for male validation and that Nate was always an abuser. How do we get from that to a point where we don't even know if Cassie cares about this man or if she just cares about his money? And that feels less like a character choice of some internal conflict within Cassie. And it feels more like them not knowing what to do with Nate and Cassie's relationship. Because how do we go from this abuser and this pathetic woman to a power balance between the two of them that is constantly shifting? Now, that isn't an accusation saying that it's not possible for them to get there. It's a genuine question that was left unanswered. How did we get here? How did the characters that we knew become these characters who don't seem to relate to their past very much? And that is an opportunity to show us how they got there. And I don't feel like that was shown. So again, that is a valid reading of what is happening, but it doesn't address the issue that viewers have with it. We're not saying that it's not possible for Cassie and Nate to go from point A to point Z. We're saying we would like to be let in on how that journey happened, because you're telling a story. That's the point. The point of the story isn't the wedding or her OnlyFans. That's not the point, right? Those are vehicles to make us understand what you're trying to communicate. And in the first 2 seasons, when we were sexualizing Cassie, we understood that it was to communicate that she had low self-esteem. That's how she felt about herself. So what is this storyline communicating to us about Nate or Cassie, or about how they became the Nate and Cassie that they are today? It doesn't. And notice something important. There's almost no white collar aspiration available anywhere in the show outside of Lexi. Nothing. And does Lexi herself count as white collar? Question. In older American depictions of 20-somethings finding themselves in the world, even rebellious characters still existed within a social horizon where adulthood could potentially mean something stable. This was true even in Girls, Shaped by the Great Recession. In Euphoria's version of America, there's almost no believable path toward dignified adulthood at all. The future barely exists as an idea. What fills the vacuum instead is monetizing beauty, criminal networks, surveillance, and emotional commodification. This is just a very concentrated area for nefarious things to happen. You know, Angel said it's like there's a magnet underneath the soil. I think specifically LA, the setting being LA, is a part of the point. They talk about it in the beginning and moving there during the pandemic. And there's other ways that they talk about it. Nate and Cassie's relationship fits perfectly into that framework. Nate embodies an older masculine script that no longer translates into stability, authority, or success the way it once did. That feels deeply connected to the broader crisis of masculinity today. Meanwhile, Cassie gained leverage through self-objectification, so there's this bleak exchange where men lose traditional economic power and women gain certain forms of leverage, but that leverage itself is rooted in commodification. No one is actually liberated. I think that this Redditor it's like they're pointing out commentary that exists, because when we create art, we are creating it within reality. So reality is going to be reflected in the art that we're making. If you decide you want to make a cool, badass Western, and you want to have a sex worker, and you want to have a drug dealer, and you want to have narcos, and you want to have all these plot lines, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're giving some meaningful commentary on American society. And I don't think that he is. I don't think there's any proof that he is. And think about the lack of institutions in the show. The adults and authorities in Euphoria are either absent or predatory criminals. Even the cops working with Rue, they don't even pretend to care about her in the slightest. I don't know. I think that's kind of a realistic portrayal, if anything, of the DEA. Like, do we think the DEA is out here trying to save people's asses? No. Not the Euphoria of season 1 and 2, but the adulthood these characters were always going to inherit. I think that is valid. I think that this is a beautiful reading of a piece of media that does not deserve this much analysis, to be honest, because the writing just wasn't there. The medium that you chose overpromised in its pacing and in its cinematography and in the years in between seasons. It overpromised a level of quality that the writing did not deliver and could not deliver. So even if this is really what he wanted to convey, it's not what was interpreted by the audience. When you have a drama, you can do some funny, funky work with the camera, but don't get crazy. Because when you get crazy, what you're communicating to your audience is, hey, you see how artistic that was? I got something to say, something important, so pay attention. You're asking for a level of emotional investment that you do not earn with your writing, and that makes people disappointed. and confused and disinterested and generally dislike the project that you're making. So I think that also like a show like Riverdale is kind of an example of a show that pivoted once they realized they were about to be on bullshit. Like the first season of Riverdale was 13 episodes, and that was the most well received season. It had a story arc, you know, it was serial, it wasn't episodic. And then I guess somewhere along the way they realized, oh, fuck the comics, fuck whatever story, fuck everything actually. Let's just get silly. Let's just have some fun. Let's make it 23 episodes. And that was so much less disappointing than if they would have kept. Imagine if season 2 of Riverdale came out. Season 2 wasn't even that bad, honestly. I don't really remember that well. Imagine if season 2 came out, they were hyping it. It was like 12 episodes. It came out 2 years later. It was the cinematography, the cameras were just zooming and panning and swirling and working. Imagine.
Listen up, ragamuffins.
Tried to get in the garage.
Veronica?
Jughead.
What are you doing here?
Wait, so these are your bitches?
I beg your misogynistic pardon?
Clothes off, swimsuits on.
Because if you did, I might have to punish you.
Out of the way, Bert and Ernie.
Sardonic humor is just my way of relating to the world.
If they had brought that bullshit to us through that sort of medium, how we would feel about it. You have to understand your audience and you have to understand yourself. Another critique that doesn't make any sense to me is when people say that the reason that we dislike all the gore and the shock value and the egregious sexually explicit bullshit scenes is because of the rise of Puritan culture, which I feel like is one of those things that people heard someone say somewhere and they just ran with it. Because if we're going to talk about the rise of Puritan culture, I think we need to talk about it in a way that makes sense. And it doesn't make sense to say that a group of people, a demographic of viewers who were never the target for gore and egregious sex scenes are being affected by Puritan culture because we don't want to see that. Point me to a period in time where teenage girls and young women were the target demographic for gore and sexual explicitness, and I'll consider your point. But it doesn't exist, and so it doesn't make any sense. I started watching Game of Thrones for the first time a couple of weeks ago. Now, I'm not a fan of sexual explicitness in my TV shows and gore. If the show can go without them, that's what I prefer. Going into Game of Thrones, I understand that I'm not the target demographic. So I'm not going to go into Game of Thrones and say that, oh, there's too much sex, there's too much blood, there's too much gore. Because I understand that adds to the story in a way that it took away from Euphoria's story. In Game of Thrones, when you have a sex scene, it is communicating the power dynamic between the people involved in the sex. The sex scenes mean something. When you're watching Game of Thrones, you don't get the feeling that the person is throwing in sex scenes because they're a pervert. You get the sense that this sex scene is helping me understand the power dynamic between the people involved. And sex says a lot about you as a person. How you perform sex, what you like sexually says a lot about you. And in Game of Thrones, they do a good job communicating that. The way that people have sex with sex workers versus with lovers versus with people who they're adulterating with versus their fucking siblings. It's all different because it communicates something about the people having sex, because sex says a lot about you. So what does Cassie's titties 20 times tell us about Cassie that we don't already know? What is being conveyed, not by the presence of sexual scenes themselves, because a scene that is sexual does not have to be sexually explicit. In television or in art, like showing and not telling is the goal. And to me, certain sex scenes Sexual explicitness is telling rather than showing when it's not adding to the plot. In Game of Thrones, when you have explicit sex scenes, they are showing and telling and immersing in a way. When you have sexually explicit scenes in Euphoria, you're telling me. You're not showing me what it means. You're not showing me what it communicates about the character. It's empty. And the same thing with the gore. When there is violence in a show like Game of Thrones, number one, it is targeted to an audience of people that are accepting of that type of content and that are not bothered by it, which is not teenage girls and young women. And it expresses something about the character. The way that a character performs an act of violence says something about them. If the character is enjoying it and reveling in the person's misery, if the person is mercy killing, if the person is afraid, if the person is being influenced and they're being a coward and they don't even want to do it, but they have to, the violent scenes communicate something about the person who is committing the act of violence. And it says something about the victim as well. Is the victim being prideful in his last few moments? Is he begging for his life, begging for mercy? These scenes mean something in a show like Game of Thrones. And they're also for an audience of people who accept that type of content. So to say that the reason we don't like it is because of the rise of Puritan culture, I think is a very shallow interpretation of our criticism of it. Also, when we're having discourse, it's really important to understand that the presence of sexually explicit scenes in themselves are not the issue. The issue is that he does not know how to write these scenes in a way that appeals to his audience because he does not understand his audience. Your audience is young women and teenage girls. Young women and teenage girls are not averse to all sexual explicitness, but you have to know how to write it for them. Young women and teenage girls enjoy smut. They enjoy romance. They enjoy passion. They enjoy sexual scenes where women are centered and not being viewed or objectified through the male gaze. And so if he were to write scenes like this, that would make sense. But he's writing sex scenes for an audience that he doesn't have, but I guess he's trying to gain. And then when that audience doesn't respond to material that was never written for them, then they are too purist about sex. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. The difference between a show that has a theme and that has a message, it makes sense to get super cinematic and super artsy with it. It makes sense to have the camera moving all these ways to communicate how the character is feeling, because you want to use every single element to communicate your idea. But if you don't have a fucking idea and you're doing all this zooming and swiveling and swirling and panning and all these camera tricks, but nothing's going on up here, you're like, you have me looking for something and nothing's there. That's like if you give me a silver platter and there's fish sticks. And like, I don't know, fish sticks are probably fine, but don't give me fish sticks on a silver platter. And then when I'm confused, look at me like I'm crazy. Whatever. But like I was saying, like shows like Pretty Little Liars, that's a drama. Like nobody expected or asked Pretty Little Liars to have this profound commentary on American society. It was drama and it was entertaining. And it was shot and produced in a way that the writing and the production, they matched. But when the writing and the production don't match, it's like, you think I'm stupid. You think I'm a fucking idiot. You think I'm a fucking idiot child. And I just want to see pretty colors, la la la, and nice shots, and guns and cowboys, and glitter and drugs. I'm not an idiot. But I don't know. I'm not like mad. I don't even know why I'm like, it's not that serious. Relax, girl. It's obvious that what Sam wants us to feel is tension. The scenes are drawn out. The camera pans slowly, but the storytelling does not do anything to earn this emotional tension. And that's why people say that it's just shock value. Not only do these scenes not really communicate anything about these characters internally, they don't do any, like, that is how you earn that emotional tension. You earn that emotional tension because in that moment, you are revealing something to us about the character. But when it adds nothing to the story, it is just for shock value. Because it's like, okay, why'd you do that? You don't know. We don't know. Everybody's, girl, I'm confused. You confused. We're all confused. Because after the cliffhanger is all tied up, right? So every episode kind of left off with a cliffhanger. So once the cliffhanger is tied up, what does that mean? What am I to make of that? What's the purpose? People don't like it when your only goal is to provoke an emotional reaction, but you don't do anything to earn that emotional reaction. It's cheap. It's hollow. It's not good writing. People don't like that. The expectations, the level of production were way too high for the level of writing. And I think that he doesn't understand his audience. I think that he being Sam Levinson, I don't think he understands his audience. I don't think he understands how to properly communicate what he's trying to communicate. And I don't think he understands what he's trying to communicate. Some shows are cinematic and they earn that. Shows like Hollywood on Netflix, that's a good ass show. The Politician, that's a good ass show. And when I finished those shows, they genuinely altered my brain. I finished those shows having deep feelings, having deep reflections about my life and what I want to do with it. You can't give me this cinematic ass show, and when I finish it, all I'm thinking is, what the fuck was that? Why the fuck was I watching it? Ew, that was weird. That was uncomfortable. I don't want to look at this. Why did he do that? What's going on? How do we get from here to here with this character? Why does this character look nothing like the character that it was 3 years ago, 2 seasons ago? That's not ideal. Unfortunately, with 8 episodes, we're expecting a tight script and a narrative arc. If you're giving us 8 episodes, why the fuck is your script not airtight? Why is every piece of writing not doing something to uplift the theme and the plot and the message you're trying to convey? Because there is no theme and no plot and no message that you're trying to convey. Like, this is just aesthetics. It's just aesthetics. And like, this is TV. If you wanted to give us aesthetics, go, I don't know, paint. Go make a painting. Give us some visual art. Why are you giving me a TV show? We just want to do aesthetics. Why are you giving me an 8-episode cinematic production of a TV show? Specifically, not a TV show. Like, TV shows, that is fine. You can do that. But anyway, okay. I had a really fun time, though, reading Reddit comments. So I'm going to look at a couple more that I really enjoyed. So much of the social media commentary on Euphoria is so negative. So many want this show to be something it's not. Euphoria is not about strong, independent women or girl boss energy. Euphoria is literally a show that's about cause and effect, which is hilarious because the fact that this season was a failure is the best example of cause and effect. The cause being you lost half of your team, nobody wants to be here anymore, and the effect is that, well, we see the effect. It serves as a look into the darker side of the teenage, early adulthood experience that really does exist for some people. It existed for me and for many people I serve in my professional life. It's a story of multiple truths and no happy endings, just the results of the character's choices. No character is completely wrong or right. Their behaviors and actions reflect their individual realities and circumstances, which honestly makes it even more interesting. I have truly enjoyed Euphoria from the start. Hopefully, I can find others who do as well. Side note, if you're looking for a warm and fuzzy feel-good show, this isn't it. So for one, nobody was ever looking for a warm, fuzzy, feel-good show in Euphoria. Like, I feel like Rue overdosed episode 1, no? So anyone who stuck around was not looking for warm and fuzzy or even a happy ending. People were looking for the drama and for resolutions to these actions, you know? And we just didn't get that. I agree that this show is not about girl boss, girl power. And back to that first comment, even if we give Sam so much benefit of the doubt, if he's cooking up this amazing, profound story that has this deep commentary, who's catching it? Who's catching it besides Redditor number whatever the hell? Not his audience, not his fans. Do you know, up until the moment where Maddie was getting used as a human shield, so many people were idolizing her aesthetic. Even the softballs that he threw at his audience, right? We have Maddie who tries really, really hard to give off this hard ass girl boss, not feeling, not caring, badass boss bitch. You know, we see it by the way that she talks to people, by the way that she dresses, by the way that she behaves. She really, really wants people to think of her as a bad bitch. This softball characterization, right, Because upon even slight analysis, you understand that this is a defense mechanism. Maddie's not a bad bitch. She's a hurt, abused, down bad bitch who is desperate. She's desperate for money. She is not this confident badass who people think she is. She is, these are all defense mechanisms. So if the audience couldn't catch a softball like that, who is he throwing these metaphors to? Who's catching them, Sam? This one guy? This is probably him. That's not even him. I don't even think that he didn't write that. But if he magically somehow was throwing out all these beautiful metaphors and whatever the fucks and allegories and then this and that, nobody's catching them, bro. Bro literally put Reddit copy pasta in the script and it was supposed to be badass. Like, please. Sam's not throwing anything, and if he was, the audience isn't catching it, unfortunately. Oy. This is a comment that I actually agree with. I find that a lot of criticism for this season is boiling down to everyone is unlikable or it's torture porn, etc. But I think the real issue is that it's become totally unfettered from any kind of reality. The early seasons were heightened and dramatized and stylized, but they were rooted in real feelings: inadequacy, jealousy, need for validation, the temptation of doing something wrong in exchange for reward of some kind. A lot of little deals with the devil. But now it's too plotty, too literal, and there's no time for internalization or characters having experiences with each other. It's all about the fucking criminal plots, which was never what this show was about. You brought us into a different world. It feels like you wanted to make a different show. You know, this little thought experiment that I did when I was thinking about the show, if we were to recast, this might be like a little far-fetched, right? This might be like too hypothetical of a hypothetical to make sense, but follow me. If every single person, every single main character in this show was replaced with a different actor, right? And they were all given different names, would anybody relate any part of this show to seasons 1 or 2 of Euphoria? The only thing that is connecting seasons 1 and 2 to season 3 of Euphoria is the actors. And that's not good. Nothing else is nothing from seasons 1 and 2 of Euphoria has contributed to where we are now. That's the problem. It is okay for Sam to start and open with these characters who are unrecognizable, but they did no work to tether these characters to their past selves in any way. These characters are unrecognizable and go. Not these characters are unrecognizable. Let me, through the plots, through their internal conflicts, show you how we got here. I'm not going to show you any of that. Fuck you. Go to hell. Sorry. That's what Sam said, not me, y'all. Also, I wanted to know how much of this show, because it's sort of the trendy thing to go and shit on the writer, Sam Levinson. And it's fun. I enjoy it. Hey, you're never going to catch me hating on you for jumping on the bandwagon. Why not? If you're going that direction, jump on. I don't care. But I want to know how much of this is really his fault and how much of it is him just being like the face of it for whatever reason that we decided. And no, it's his fault. I looked, he's the creator and showrunner, executive producer, director, and writer of most of the episodes. So unfortunately, you do gotta hold this one, Sammy. This is the best Reddit comment. This cracked me the fuck up. Hold up. Fixed. Season 3 tried to be about the collapse of American future, but as interpreted by Sam Levinson, a pervert who collapsed the character arcs of Maddie, Cassie, and Rue into instruments of sexual commodification and shock value. It fails to meet its ambition while exploiting its talent. Right. Because no pervert ever produced great art.